I really am so excited to hear.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm excited to be here. I was really honored to be invited to speak on my experience on developing graduate crisis resource management education. My topic is graduate crisis resource management education, developing the next phase of training. So I'm just going to go through the preliminaries and go through some basic things to tell you about that I have no vested interest, that I have no conflict of interest, and the faculty of this course has nothing to disclose. I also want to take some time to acknowledge my team members, and this would not be possible without the efforts of quite a few people, as you can see listed here, most specifically the NICU simulation team, which is made up of physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, who all come together on a consistent basis to revise and develop these programs. I also would love to thank the Boston Children's Hospital program for simulation. Without them, this would not be possible. And also the program for medical simulation in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where all of my debriefing training and instructor training was obtained through. So my objectives for today, I would like to provide you with an experience overview of crisis resource management course development. So just a very brief introduction of where we came from, and then I'm going to tell you about where we've gone. Then I'm going to discuss the importance of the course development cycle and its application to graduate course development, and discuss the realistic triumphs that we faced in the process and practical challenges, and then some recommendations for practice. And at any point along the way, I'd love to hear, obviously, any questions that you have about my experience, but also if there are any points that you all have from your own experience, that would be fantastic if we could bring that into the discussion as well. So why graduate simulation? Well, we're here to save lives, to enhance our team communication, to do our best, to reflect and learn, and to recover from our mistakes. And that was the main premise for us developing our original crisis resource management simulation course. But also, to develop our graduate simulation course, we also wanted to incorporate practice identified challenges from our crisis events. So not only do we look at our crisis resource management training and also the medical diagnoses that we face every day in our unit, but we also wanted to bring in a little bit more to enhance and advance our learning. And here we are as a team in the simulation suite. So to go over a little bit of our early development in our crisis resource management curriculum, we really started to put together our initial coursework in 2006. So our team came together, and we've had some changes in our team members throughout the course of the year, but we really started looking at this at 2006, and that's when we first developed our crisis resource management course for our NICU. Our initial cycle for development was around 6 months, and before we did any of this, all of our instructors went through a formalized training course at the Institute for Medical Simulation in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because we all wanted to make sure that we were trained in not only the coursework of crisis resource management, but also the debriefing, which, as you all know, is one of the more challenging portions to the crisis resource management courses itself. In our initial development, we did not utilize a needs assessment. We kind of came together and looked at it and said, okay, these are what our needs are. This is what we're going to try to do. We know we're going to address teamwork training, but we created the diagnosis that we saw most commonly in the unit, and then we came together and formulated a curriculum based on that. Really, our focus of that training was all of us speaking the same language. We knew that it was going to be a challenge to get greater than 100 nurses, over 30 attendings, and over 50 fellows to all come on the same page and really speak the same language revolving around crisis resource management training. And it was a challenge. It took us over 2 years really to get everyone through this training, to get everyone on the same page, and to really start managing and utilizing crisis resource management training consistently within our unit. Our scenarios were basic. It was basic NICU diagnoses that we see commonly in the unit, respiratory distress syndrome, sepsis, and so forth, and the management techniques. So that was our real focus, is let's look at the medicine, let's figure out how we can do this better, and also let's look at how we can incorporate all of this training and team training work into our coursework and into our unit. So then at the end of those 2 years, we all regrouped, and we decided that we were going to formulate our next coursework. And then we looked at each other and we said, so what is next? What is our next course and how we're going to do this? And we've realized that all of our clinicians were on board. We really were starting to see and utilize crisis resource management training in our units. Simulation was becoming more accepted. People were getting much more comfortable in the simulation suite. It wasn't as foreign to them. There wasn't as much fear involved as going into that simulation suite. So we really felt like at this point in time, we could challenge our learners a little bit more and challenge our staff a little bit more. So we came up with the idea of a graduate course in NICU Crisis Resource Management. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that means, at least in our eyes. So why our graduate courses? Well, again, we had the interest and need to challenge the clinicians at a higher level. Our basic CRM met our needs, but we needed to actually address some of the further challenges that we saw in the unit. And we made a decision, a conscious decision, to superimpose other variables into crisis resource management training, along with not just the terminology and the teamwork skills, but also the medical case scenarios. I like to call these additions to our practice our tertiary skills. So in fall of 2008, our graduate coursework began, and we decided that at this point in time we were going to be much more deliberate about our practice, much more systematic about our practice, and really do this from step 1 to step 8 process. And we were going to follow the course development cycle, and this course development cycle, and I'm going to go through that very specifically, was obtained through our work with the simulation team here at Children's Hospital Boston. So I know this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'm going to go through it step by step about what our course development cycle looks like. I'm sure many of you use your own development cycle, but this is what ours is in particular. So for step 1, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a proposal. The first thing really that we did is we sat down as a team, and we had the members of our Children's Hospital Boston Simulation Program team there, and we came up with what our proposal was going to look like. And from there, we actually submitted our proposal to our higher leadership for approval. And that is actually a very important step, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later in my discussion here today. The next step really was to kind of look at an overview meeting. And within this overview meeting, the biggest thing that we wanted to focus on was developing our needs assessment. And the needs assessment is actually a very important part of the process. I'm going to go into that a little bit further, but that really was decided, planned, and the jobs that we had around that needs assessment were assigned at that time. Then our next step was actually to do a lot of brainstorming. Once we got our needs assessment back, we actually went into the brainstorming process. From the brainstorming process, we go into the retreat, where we actually are going to decide, discuss, plan, and implement a lot of our curriculum development during that time. Once that's developed, we go into the pilot, which is also very important, train the trainer, our huddle session, which is to evaluate everything that we developed from the pilot, and then we have our implementation of Go Live for our course. From our course, we review it, and then back to step 1 again when we're ready to develop another program. So in the initial overview meeting, we sat down to develop our needs assessment. This was the very first time actually that we went about doing this. We hadn't done it for our first initial round when we developed our crisis resource management training. So we needed to learn a little bit about the development of the needs assessment. We found, though, very quickly that it was very essential to the development process of our actual course. And we also found that not only did it really reflect the educational needs of our staff, but also the wants of our staff. And I think that's a very important difference to talk about, because very often we went into this process with an agenda of our own of what we thought our staff needed. But when we went and looked at our needs assessment, we actually found out a little bit differently that their wants and their desires were a little bit different from what we were thinking. So we had to actually compromise on that and do a little bit of both when we did the actual planning of our course. But this was really one of the most essential processes of developing our curriculum, was that needs assessment, and we found it very valuable going forward. Then we needed to look at our needs assessment and really extrapolate out what were our themes? What did we actually see in this needs assessment? What is going to be of use and what can we incorporate? So we knew teamwork training was there. We knew that was going to be a piece of our curriculum. But what were we going to use for our scenarios, and what was going to be our tertiary skill, meaning the challenge that we were going to pose to our trainers, our trainees. So there's a few examples of some of the themes that we initially identified. One of the most prevalent themes was actually conflict resolution. And not just conflict resolution among our own staff members, but also conflict resolution among different consult services, conflict resolution with parents if there were parents at the bedside. So that was a huge theme that we identified. We also had some other themes that were identified based on medical scenarios. So our unit is a neonatal intensive care unit, and we accept, because we are a freestanding children's hospital, we accept patients from all over for different diagnoses. But one of the ones that we see less commonly, because we have a cardiac critical care unit here, is the cardiac infant. We do have them, however. So one of the medical diagnoses that our staff really wanted to practice was related to cardiac disease and the management of congenital heart disease on our unit. So we looked at all of these, and then we carefully balanced what they were asking for with what our identified training goals were, and we collaborated together and developed our product from there. So the other thing we needed to talk about too when we developed our needs assessment is how were we going to distribute the needs assessment information. And depending on your institution and the facilities that are available to you, we happen to be fortunate here that we have a computer-based educational program. So we actually did put our needs assessment on a computer program and actually sent it out via email. However, paper is also an option. We chose not to use that at this time, but you can also do that if that's something that you're interested in doing in your own institution. So then once we established what our identified needs were and what the highlights were, then we had our retreat, and we came back to really talking about the nuts and bolts of what our course was going to look like. And this was a time when we actually developed both our didactic and our scenarios. Obviously this can take some time, and we are a fairly small group, so we needed to really divide out and conquer what we were going to develop and how we were going to develop this. We also planned for the administrative aspects of the course, and to be quite frank, I find that this piece right here, the administrative aspects, are actually the most challenging. Developing the didactic and the scenarios is fairly straightforward for the most part for us, but the administrative aspects and making sure that everything is running smoothly and getting out there and people are being informed and registering was really a challenge. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the things to think about for administrative aspects is how are you going to get the information about your course out there? Are you going to do a flyer distribution, and how is that flyer going to be sent out? Are you going to use email? Are you going to post it? And that was really a challenge for us to figure out how we can reach the most amount of people. And also participant registration. Again, we are fortunate to have a computer program where we can actually put a course into our net learning based system and have people sign up. But for those of you that do not have that available to you, signing up on a paper sheet could be just as effective. The issues that come along is making sure that you have adequate registration for each of your courses. And then also sending out course reminders to make sure that everybody is aware that the course is happening, that we have a location, a date, a time, and reminding people of when that is, what they need to bring with them, and reminder of the rules of engagement of the course. And then finally, the evaluation process. We do offer continuing education credits for both our nurses, our respiratory therapists, and also CMEs for our physicians. So we need to make sure that all of that is planned, up to date, and implemented prior to going live with the course itself. So a lot of behind the scenes. Again, the didactic and the scenarios, while it's very labor intensive, that tends to be for us the fun aspect of the development piece. It's the administrative aspects that you really need to think about. And then next we went into the pilot testing, and that's really an essential part of the creation process, is to make sure that you actually test your product before it goes live to the entire unit. And we make sure that for each individual course that we have a pilot testing process. and it's done in a very deliberate manner. For us, the way we pilot test our courses is we actually invite a group of participants. Those individuals, both made up of physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists that we know are very familiar with the simulation process and can help us work out all of the challenges that come when we do an initial pilot. However, if that's not an option, you can always just use your team itself, but being aware that if you do choose to use your own crisis resource management team, that there's always a possibility that there could be bias and not as much objectivity because you were the ones that were creating the course itself. So we chose to go with the group of participants, but the CRM team would be just as well, and it would work just as fine. So once we created our program, created our scenarios, had all the administrative aspects in place, ran our pilot, realized what our difficulties were that we needed to correct, we re-huddled to look at all of that information, figure out where our challenges were, and iron out the kinks before we actually go live. This huddle piece is actually a time, too, to really think about the train to trainer. So if you have other individuals that are going to be running the scenarios that may not have been part of the planning process, this would be a perfect time to bring them on board and go through the scenarios and the didactic portion with them as well. So all the revisions occur during the huddle. And then once that is finalized, it takes a few weeks to generally a month or two to actually get this all finalized, up and ready, get your administration issues corrected, and then you're ready for your go live. So I'd like to actually take a few minutes right now to demonstrate a video. Just to give you a little bit of background on this video, this is actually a video where we interjected parents into the simulation scenario. So again, we've had our experience now with our tertiary training where we've had parent presence. We've also had conflict resolution within our training. And we actually are about to develop a course where we're going to integrate some of our other services into our crisis resource management training as well. So this is an example of a parent presence video of a crisis event. And you'll see the parents are in the back, and there's a facilitator with them, helping them support them through this experience.
Why is this heart rate so low now?
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna take it out. I'm gonna take it out. Okay, I'm gonna take it out. Okay,
Why did they just take it out? I thought we were trying to get it in.
All right, can you start from this place, please? She does have an idea. Can we get some more?
What's going on?
Is he done?
Okay, why did he crash like that?
They're gonna work. Okay. The space to work on it.
Are there any other doctors you can get in? Is there anyone more experienced?
Can't lose
Stop
him.
compressions. It looks like he's got a heart rate.
This is...
Okay, heart rate's coming up.
What I was explaining was that video was a perfect example of putting in those tertiary skills, where not only did we have the teamwork training that was evident there from the team working on the mannequin, but also the diagnoses. This was a patient that was suffering from respiratory distress, required intubation, and had a severe bradycardic event during the intubation, as well as superimposing the parents at the bedside. So it's adding in that third layer, that third challenge to the team to really up it a notch to make sure that we're really reflecting what we see at the bedside. Not only can you do this not just with parent presence, but there's a whole variety of other things that you can think about based on what your needs are of your unit in particular. So just to go through a few of our triumphs and our challenges that we face. Success really is a moving target. This is our third iteration of our graduate curriculum. We're about to work on our fourth iteration. The evaluation that we've had from our courses has been overwhelmingly positive. The staff really have come to use this as a second language. We're seeing it practiced within the unit, that people are really starting to embrace crisis resource management. But people also enjoy the extra challenge of bringing in families at the bedside, of also the conflict resolution techniques, because this is what we see. This is our reality. We've also had a iteration where we had a medical error occur. It was actually during our conflict resolution course that we did that. So we had another layer that we added in that the team needed to debrief following. Our challenges really, the largest amount of our challenges that we have are with the administration aspects of the program. We are a very large program. We have over, like I said before, 100 nurses, 30-odd attending physicians, and over 50, if not more, fellows that rotate through, including nurse practitioners, respiratory therapists. So it's a huge program. And trying to keep making sure that we keep all of our courses registered fully is a challenge with all the competing demands that people share. So that is why we send out a reminder before our course, at least a week before, to make sure that people are on board. And sometimes we actually have to recruit participants because, again, people do have a lot going on, and trying to keep track of what your needs are as far as your education base is difficult for everyone with all the competing demands. So that piece of it is really challenging. It requires a lot of overview, of oversight. I myself am one of the individuals that keep track of all that information, and it does require a lot of legwork. So for us, that's been a huge issue. The other thing that we also have challenges, and it's something to think about, is the use of Confederates or actors in the scenarios. From the previous video that you saw, those were actually, the parents were actually two actors that were hired to play out the role of the parent within that scenario. And they're phenomenal. They add a whole element to the realistic nature of the scenario itself. But the challenge with that is the financial cost of adding an actor into the scenario. So if your program is thinking of doing that, it's definitely, if you're hiring actors that are outside of your program, there is that financial concern to think about. For us, we have used actors, but we've also used our own instructors as actors within the scenarios, which also can pose a challenge. Generally, when we use our own actors, what we do is announce at the beginning of our course that there may be one of us that's going to be working within the scenario to actually play a role in the scenario. So we warn the staff ahead of time because we don't want people to feel like there's any trickery or anything underhanded involved. But also when you're doing that, you have to be really cognizant of what the themes are in the room, and also what your objectives are of what you're going to be trying to get out of the scenario. So there's a lot to think about if you're using your own instructors for the course. Not that it can't be done. We do it, and I believe that we've done it very successfully, but there's a little bit more elements to think about when you're talking about using your own instructors. Another point on the actors as well is when you are using them in these scenarios, generally before you bring them in, they are going to need some training on how to really work within a medical setting and what your goals and objectives are. They do need a lot of debriefing beforehand, and also they need some instruction on how to debrief after, so they are able to give the best feedback possible within these situations. We bring our actors into our debriefing sessions, so they are an active participant within those debriefing sessions. So a lot of training is generally involved with getting them to a place where they are able to actually participate in that effectively. So really just my recommendations from my experience and my group's experience of developing these programs, and we've been doing it now for quite a few years, is really establishing an enthusiasm from organizational leadership. Again, when I talked in the very beginning of this presentation about generating a proposal for your course and submitting that to leadership for approval, you know, with all of the different concerns that we've had regarding recruitment and getting people to sign up for our courses, having that leadership behind us has been a godsend, really. It's really been an exceptional support to us to help us along in the process, both from a nursing end and from a medical leadership end. So we make sure that before we do any of our courses that there is a formal proposal generated and approved. And that way we know we have that backup. The other recommendation is aggressive recruitment strategies. Whatever your structure is of the location where you're working, making sure that you have that administration piece behind you, because really aggressively recruiting is extremely important. What I found helpful was establishing regular scheduled courses. They all occur on the same day of the same month of the same week, so we know exactly when they're happening. They're always at the same time, so people can expect them to happen. They also know we are, I guess, fortunate in the fact to say that our crisis resource management courses are actually also used for our mock codes that are required by our Department of Health here in Massachusetts. So not only do we have that as a desired educational strategy, but we also have it as a mandatory educational strategy. So we generally require all attendings that they need to at least attend once every 2 years. And all of our nurses, aside from charge nurses and some of our specialty nurses, need to also do the course every 2 years, whereas our specialty nurses need to do it every 1 year. So we have a set schedule of when people do have to take these courses, and that also helps as well. And then just tracking recruitment and registration closely. There is a lot of legwork even before a course to make sure that your courses are full, that they're adequately staffed, not overstaffed or over registered, because that could be a problem as well. But making sure that you have an adequate amount of people to support the scenario that you're working with. And sometimes that means sending out multiple emails to have people sign up and to get people in there. So there is a lot of legwork on the front end to make sure that your courses are running smoothly. And then I always like to always think out of the box. Creativity is key. I think we're all creative here. This is why we love simulation. We can get in there and really use our experiences to generate some fabulous scenarios. But really thinking out of the box of how are we going to make this work. There are so many different ideas of how you can create a graduate course. And I think it's really important, think about what your unit needs, what are your challenges, do that needs assessment, really hear what your staff want, but also, consolidate that with your identified needs. And the program that you create can be truly amazing. So, there's my bibliography, and I am happy to take any questions or comments that you have.